The port city of Mariupol in Ukraine appears to be falling to the Russians. This is video from Russia's defense ministry. Russia says it shows Ukrainian soldiers leaving the Azovstal steel plant where they've been holding out for weeks now. It's unclear when the recording was made. This would, though, bring an end to what many have called the most devastating siege of Russia's war in Ukraine. Will this change the trajectory of the war despite Russia's previous setbacks? James Heappey is the UK's Armed Forces Minister. Hi, Minister Heappey. Good to meet you and good to have you on our program.
Thanks for having me.
Do you view the surrender of the final Ukrainian soldiers in that steel plant in Mariupol as the first significant Russian victory in this war?
No, I don't. I think that, you reach a point militarily where all you're competing over is rubble, and any strategic importance of that steelworks is long since gone. The coastline on the Sea of Azov had already been taken, so Mariupol as a port was no longer of strategic importance to Ukraine because it had already fallen. So those incredibly courageous Ukrainian fighters that have been hidden away in the sort of bowels of the steel plants and sort of popping up and imposing enormous cost on the Russian invaders have more than done their job. They've had dozens of Russian battalion tactical groups fixed on that steelworks for weeks and weeks and weeks, which has given the Ukrainian armed forces in the wider Donbas a real opportunity to prepare themselves for the attack that was coming. That attack is now underway. The initial wave has been repelled. So this is exactly the time for Zelensky to ensure the lives of those who remained at the steelworks. And what an amazingly courageous bunch of people they are. They have done something that, when the history of this conflict is written, it may well be that we reflect on the holding operation that they did and the number of Russian battalion tactical groups that they sucked up could well be the thing that allowed the Ukrainians to be ready to repel the attack on the Donbas when it came.
So from that, I gather that you don't view it as any sort of strategic victory for Russia. No. Are you worried about the perception, though, of a symbolic one at this stage of the war?
No.
Why not?
Well, because I just don't think anybody in Ukraine or beyond is remotely concerned that the rubble of a steelworks is worth fighting over when the tactical need to distract the Russian armed forces whilst you prepared your main position is complete.
And what's your assessment of that main position at this juncture? I ask because intelligence from your country, for example, has shown just how much Russia's army and combat abilities have been affected by their mistakes, really, so far, and their lack of preparedness for Ukraine's resistance. At this point, how prepared is Ukraine? How is the fight going for those soldiers in the Donbas?
So I think it's going well. I mean, I think that what we've seen is mistake after mistake being compounded into a place where the Russians have now written down their forces by, we think, around a third. There were mistakes around the way that the ground operation got underway in the first place without air superiority being achieved. There was mistakes around the fact that the ground operation tried to advance concurrently on 7 axes into Ukraine, including across countryside that at that time of year was very marshy, which meant that people were stuck on roads, and the Ukrainians heroically were able to just ambush after ambush after ambush on those big armored columns. And then when they withdrew from the north of Ukraine and went back into Russia, if they'd given themselves time to properly refurbish those battalions and bring them round into the fight in the Donbas once they were properly rehabilitated, they would have been much more meaningful. But instead, Putin interfered again and accelerated their recommitment into the Donbas. And so you end up with battalions that were already well diminished from their effort north of Kyiv, being sent round into the Donbas prematurely on ground that was really, really wet and muddy. So again, they were stuck on main supply routes, surrendering the advantage of their mass, therefore, because they were so focused on a particular avenue of advance. And so again, we found ourselves in a position where what began as a numerically inferior force on the Ukrainian side has been able to repel the Russians to such a point now where the Donbas is pretty evenly matched. And when forces are evenly matched like that, the advantage is with the defender, because they are in really well-prepared positions that it's really hard to take.
The advantage may be with the defender, but I heard, for example, the Pentagon in the United States, their intelligence chief used the word stalemate to characterize what this war is at the moment and what it might more so develop into. Do you agree with that characterization?
Well, look, I mean, I think that's the point I'm making, that, you know, two evenly matched forces, the advantage with the defender. Ukraine is in defense. If Ukraine was wanting to get out of its defensive positions and start to counterattack, different, because then Russia is in defense and the advantage switches to them as the defender. But that's not to say that Ukraine is incapable of successfully launching a counterattack. We've seen in the last few days that they have been able to push the Russians out of Kharkiv, and indeed out of pretty much all of the Kharkiv Oblast altogether. So I think that the person in the DoD who said what you quote is right, that fundamentally we're at a point where this ain't going anywhere very quickly. I think that's to Ukraine's advantage right now. Ukraine's friends in the West will be able to rearm and re-equip Ukraine much more quickly than a sanction-ridden Russia will be able to rearm itself. But, you know, this is catastrophic failure for the Russian military in terms of the plan that they envisaged to where we are right now.
Does the stalemate, Minister, end, though, with Ukraine changing its posture from a defensive one to an offensive one?
Eventually, yes.
And do you?
But that needs to be on a time and place of Ukraine's choosing. They need to generate the forces with the superiority to be able to successfully counterattack. It is all of the supply lines at the moment are, you know, on the Russian side are the ones that are challenged. It is the Russians that are away from their home. It is the Russians that are demoralized. It's the Russians that aren't being properly fed. It's the Russians that are struggling to get ammunition. It's the Russians that are struggling to replace the missiles and the tanks, the armored personnel vehicles that are being destroyed. That will just diminish the morale of Russian forces over and over again, whilst from the Ukrainian perspective, they are successfully defending their homeland. So their morale remains high and they're getting deliveries of new kit from their friends in the West all the time.
I guess from the point of view of people watching, if that posture does eventually change, as you said, you know, it could and it would impact the outcome of this war. Does that rearming, does that refueling, does that disintegration of the Russian forces take months more, take a year more? Like what? And obviously, it's difficult to predict with any firm accuracy. But from what you know and the intelligence you have, are we looking at a situation that is months down the road, for example?
Yeah. I mean, the longest timeline that you offer in your question is the very shortest timeline in my mind. I think that things play out in the Donbas this summer, but I can't see either side going anywhere very quickly. You know, we all have to be clear that the terms for a peace need to be terms set by President Zelensky. It is his country that have had their territorial integrity violated by the Russians. He is clear that the restoration of Ukrainian territory is what he seeks. And so as this grinds to a standstill over the summer, as the Russians run out of steam in their advance, what we are then into is a period of rearming and re-equipping so that Ukrainians can counterattack to end this on their terms. That's been the view of the British government all along. I think it's the view of most other governments that are part of the sort of coalition of nations that are supporting Ukraine. And I think that's entirely the right way. I think the idea that when this freezes, we accept the point at which it freezes as a new de facto international border, all that does is rewards Putin for his aggression in the first place, and worse still, encourages him to rearm and then go again and take another bite out of Ukraine in a few years to come. So we all have to be clear that as this grinds to a standstill, which it will, the job then is then to rearm Ukraine so that they're ready to counterattack and end this on their terms.
Minister Heappey, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much indeed.